Good evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of the options that you have when you find yourself in a situation where you are behind on your mortgage, you can't pay on your mortgage. And first of all, you have to look and divide the situation into whether you're a person in your community or whether your employee is looking to stay. There are certain options. If they want to stay in the house, there are certain things that can be done. And if they don't want to stay in the house or they can't afford to stay in the house, as we've indicated, there's sometimes where people, when they sit down with their attorney or they sit down with the housing people, they find that even though they'd like to stay there, they really can't. So if you're going to be staying in the house, again, what Kathleen said, part of my notes also, the first thing is to tell people, don't ignore. If you get a letter, open the letter. If you get the people calling you, answer. Tell them that what you're doing, what you're trying. If you've talked to an attorney and you're going to have an attorney involved, tell them to talk to that attorney instead of calling you directly. So that's the very first thing. Because if you don't, you put the letters in the drawer or ignore things, a lot of times your options become limited that way. You run past time frames where you might have had an ability to do something and now you've lost it. Okay, if you're going to stay in your property, what are some of the things that you can do? First of all, you can reinstate. If you had some kind of a problem, you've gotten behind, but now you've got money, you can go to your lender and reinstate the loan. Lenders these days are going to be happy to do that. The second is forbearance. That's if you have a short-term kind of a situation where for whatever reason you have a short-term problem and you can get the lender to agree for a short period of time to allow you not to make a payment. Again, just let me interject also. These are things that individuals can do themselves. They can call the lenders. It is hard sometimes to get a lender to respond. What I would say there is just keep trying. You've all heard the news. A lot of lenders are really trying to make an effort. They're being pushed to make an effort. Some of the lenders that I've been dealing with have really ramped up and have hired additional people so that they are all of a sudden now being more willing and we'll get back to you sometimes. So you can do this yourself. A repayment plan. Sometimes if you've gotten behind, the lenders will allow you to do or will require you to do a repayment plan. And that's where they come up with an agreement, maybe over a period of 3 or 4 months, perhaps longer, where they will get you to pay back what you've owed in the past, and then perhaps will be willing to do a modification with you. In a modification situation, for a period of time, perhaps say a 3-year situation, maybe the lender's willing to either take some of the debt and put it at the back end and turn it into a balloon payment at the end of the term, or maybe lower interest rates. There's a whole variety of things, and let me say that things are changing daily. You talk to a lender today, the situation might be different. We've had mergers, we've had again, pressure from the government to be a little more cooperative, and I think frankly the lenders are getting they're kind of getting it all of a sudden. They don't want to own all these properties. This has taken longer than they thought it would, and they don't want to end up with all these properties. So those are your situations, your options there. If you don't want to stay in the house or you can't stay in the house, what are your options? One of the things that you've heard a lot about, and the realtors in the audience know about, short sales. What's a short sale? That's where you have more debt than will be able to be paid off with what the current value of the property is. A lot of times people bought these properties a few years ago when we were having the frenzy. Now they're worth less. They've gotten a first mortgage. Maybe they've gone out and gotten an equity line, perhaps code enforcement issues, perhaps tax liens. And when you add all those things up, they don't add up to what they're going to likely get for the price for the property. So if you have a short sale, what do you need to do? You need to be honest with your realtor. Let them know what the situation is, because there are certain additional documents. There's a special addendum that need to be added to your listing agreement. There's special addendum that need to be added to a sales agreement, and that is for your protection also, because it means that this particular offer or the offer that comes in from somebody isn't valid until the lender approves, because sometimes the realtor says, we have to put this, we have to list this at a price that's less than what you owe. So you don't want to be in a situation where you've agreed to something and then the lender doesn't agree, and that's what those particular addendums do. Okay, if you're in a short sale situation, what are you going to need to put together? And you ought to probably do this. If you think you're in this situation, you start putting these things together even before you have an offer, because it takes some time. You need to, or you should try to find your original loan application if you can find it. That you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you've had a loan application where you've said your situation is like this, and now you're coming back in 2 years later and you have an entirely different financial situation. You don't want to get yourself in a situation where you are putting yourself in possible jeopardy for bank fraud because you didn't disclose something, or you disclosed it improperly the first time around. So find that. Get updated financials. Prepare a monthly budget, as we've talked about. Prepare the hardship letter, and we've got examples. Get a broker's price opinion for what the value, the real value of your property is. And then give your, whoever is dealing on your behalf an authorization if they're going to be the ones that are contacting the lender, or if you're going to be contacting the lender, you can do that directly. Okay, we've talked about the contract provisions. What next? If you can't sell your property, what are your options? Sometimes your lender might be willing to do a deed in lieu of foreclosure. That means you give them back the deed instead of them foreclosing. Sometimes lenders are willing to do that because it might save them the cost and expense of having to go through a foreclosure. And what's the advantage to you? In the hierarchy, from a credit knocking standpoint, that's a little less harsh than if you have a foreclosure. A foreclosure is totally non-consensual, whereas a deed in lieu is an agreement between the two parties. There are certain situations where a lender might be willing to do a deed in lieu of foreclosure if they haven't already started the foreclosure. Also, if you have a lot of extra liens, if there's code enforcement liens, if there's other liens, if there's junior mortgages, a lender may be less willing to do a deed in lieu of foreclosure because a foreclosure would wipe out some of those underlying debts. Tax consequences. There are tax consequences to some of these things in addition to the credit consequences. If you have a situation where you have a lender who agrees to forego part of the debt, they agree to a deed in lieu of foreclosure, they agree not to go after you for part of the debt, they will send you what's called a 1099. It's income to you to have a debt forgiven. You might say, well, I didn't get any income, I have no cash. Well, the IRS doesn't look at it that way, and it's phantom income. Now, there was, back in December of last year, there was an act, and there's provisions in, I believe, the materials that you have today, and there are some provisions for if this is your primary residence. Again, so as some of the earlier speakers said, you don't want to necessarily run off and have a new residence, because then you would potentially lose those benefits. So if this is your primary residence, and there are certain limitations, but generally that would not cause you to have to declare that as income on your tax return.